Before listening to this story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It helps us feel closer to you. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. Your support keeps us bringing powerful stories like this one. I remember the taste of metal in my mouth when the navigation screen blinked and the past addresses unfolded like a confession. Tuesday night, 10:42 p.m. The car sat under the humming lights of the garage, rain ticking on the hood, and I was only trying to clear a warning icon that had been bothering me for weeks. My finger slipped into the trip logs, then into the saved routes, then into a folder named Work Late with a neat list of timestamps. I tapped the most recent one, expecting the glow of our office district in downtown Houston, and instead a quiet residential street appeared near Spring Branch, a cul-de-sac with a small park and a blue pin on a house number I did not recognize. A second route, a third. Thursdays, some Fridays. The map looked calm, but I felt the ground slant beneath me as if the concrete had turned into a treadmill running the wrong way. He had said he was doing overtime for the quarter end. The GPS said he was going home to someone else. I did not scream. I did not throw my phone. I stood there with the soft smell of damp cement and gasoline and thought about how long we had been building this life. Since 2010, when we rented a one-bedroom off Westheimer for $675 a month and ate $4 tacos because that was what we could afford after he totaled his old Honda, and we put the last of my savings into a down payment for the Toyota we still drive. Since 2013, when my mother had a scare, and we sent $200 a month back to Salvador, hoping it would cover her pills and the bus rides to the clinic. Since 2016, when the oil prices dipped, and he swore we just had to tighten for a year, and I picked up extra hours at the clinic doing intake, sometimes skipping lunch and shoving almonds in my mouth between intake forms. I thought about those years like coins we had thrown into a well, waiting for the echo to return as a blessing. The garage door rattled once in the wind and stopped. I pinched the bridge of my nose and focused on the facts. Because facts do not lie when your body tries to. The route history showed 37 visits to the same street over 4 months. Average arrival time 8:18 p.m. Average departure time 11:03 p.m. Distance from his office 9.4 miles. Distance from our house 14.7 miles. I copied the address and sent it to myself. Then I scrolled farther back and found December 19th, a Saturday, supposedly the day he was at a company holiday cleanup. The route showed a noon arrival and a 5:20 p.m. departure. I remembered that day because I had been on the phone with my sister in Recife trying to calm her after a fight, and he had sent me a picture of a dumpster full of boxes with the caption, "Long Day." I had believed the picture, believed the shadow of his hat across the cardboard. I had believed because belief was cheaper than doubt. The rain softened to a whisper, and I went upstairs, careful not to wake Sophia. She had scribbled math homework until 9 and fallen asleep with the pencil still in her hand. 4th grade. Hair stuck to her forehead in damp lines. I kissed her temple and felt the small heat of her breath, and wondered how many things in my house were true, and how many were props in a play I had not known I was acting in. I opened the closet and pulled the shoebox where we kept our passports and health cards and the printouts of our joint budget. In the budget, there was a neat column for household, a column for car, a column for savings that mostly made me angry because savings had become a word he used like a blessing while I watched it shrink. There was no column for second mortgage or secret lease, but my hands were shaking and I checked anyway, scanning with the speed of hunger. Around midnight, he texted that he was closing something with a client and not to wait up. He added a heart. I stared at the small red symbol until it blurred and became just light. I typed back, "Be careful," and put a smile. A language we speak when we cannot bring ourselves to speak the truth. Then I stared at the ceiling where the fan made its hypnotic circle, and I followed other circles in my mind. His late nights had begun around March, right after our anniversary. Our anniversary had been $20 of Thai food and a card with a sunset. He had written, "You are my calm in every storm." I thought about that sentence and tasted metal again. The first year we married, he had a way of persuading me that felt like a hand on the small of my back guiding me through a crowded room. He convinced me to skip a trip home in 2012 because flights were too expensive. He convinced me to co-sign the car in 2014 because his credit had a mark and mine was cleaner. He convinced me to keep our finances together because separate accounts sounded like we were planning for an ending. It was not ugly. It was not loud. It was a steady weather that wore me down until my no sounded like maybe and my maybe sounded like yes. He would smile and say, "Trust me," and I wanted a life where trust was the default, not the prize. So I gave it like air and did not count the breaths. When Sophia was born in 2015, I pressed her foot to my lips and cried from a place I did not know existed. He had stood by the window, holding a hospital coffee, talking softly on the phone to his father about the weight and the name and how she looked like me. I believed then that our story was small but sturdy. We would climb in careful steps. We would buy a modest house. We would teach our daughter to ride a bike in a quiet street where the oaks made shade. And then came the endless little asks that felt like stones laid in a path. Can we hold on the trip one more year? Can we skip painting the living room? Can you watch your hours because Sophia needs you after school and childcare is expensive? He was not wrong. Things were expensive. But every stone pointed in one direction, and when I looked up I could not see the road back. He started the second phone in late 2022. He said it was for clients who needed contact after hours. He left it face down on the kitchen counter and called it the work line. At first I did not touch it. Then in January 2024, he forgot it in his jacket and I moved it to the dresser, and it buzzed in my hand with a name I did not know. The message preview was just an initial and a heart. I told myself not to be that person who reads. I put it down and went to pack Sophia's lunch. The apple slices looked like small white moons, and the knife in my hand felt heavier than it should. When he came home that night, I asked what clients he had on weekends, and he kissed my forehead and said, "Real estate never sleeps." He smelled like laundry detergent and something floral that I chose to pretend was from a staging house. By spring, the late nights became a pattern. Monday, Thursday, sometimes Saturday afternoon errands that stretched until sunset. He brought flowers twice, which he rarely did, and set them on the table with a grin that asked me to clap. I did. I took pictures. I told my sister he was trying, and I was choosing to see the good. That is a sentence I have said too many times in my life. Choosing to see the good when the numbers do not add up. Choosing to see the good when the wallet holds receipts from restaurants we never go to. Choosing to see the good when you find a small pink hair tie in the cup holder that is not your child's, and convince yourself it came with the car wash. After I found the address in the GPS, I spent 2 days pretending I had not found it. I cooked rice with garlic and butter and chopped cilantro the way he likes. I held my voice steady when he said the client in Sugarland had pushed a meeting. I gathered Sophia's fundraising forms and wrote checks. I went to work and typed birth dates and insurance numbers until the numbers turned into rivers, and I felt myself stepping into them with my clothes on. On the third night, I pulled up the map again and opened the satellite view. The house near Spring Branch had a patchy lawn and a white SUV in the driveway. There was a plastic tricycle by the porch. I zoomed in until the image blurred into pixels, and I whispered, "Who are you?" Not sure if I meant the house or myself. The impossible request came the next morning, as if my fear had summoned it. He sat at the table with a bank envelope and a calculating look I had learned to dread. He said the company might finally consider him for a supervisory role if he could show flexibility. Flexibility in this case meant a few months without my paycheck, so I could handle more at home, and he could accept projects with irregular hours. He said it would look good to the boss. He said we were a team. I stared at the envelope and thought about the rent and the electric bill and the dented microwave that sometimes sparked. I thought about how the clinic had finally given me a raise to $22 an hour and how hard it had been to ask. He slid the envelope closer and said he had done the numbers and it would balance. I asked to see the numbers and he smiled and said I did not need to stress myself. He kissed my knuckles. The spot tingled as if touched by heat. That afternoon, I drove to the address. The sky was a white dishcloth wrung out by the heat. I parked 2 streets over and walked slowly, pretending to check my phone the way people do when they do not want to be seen looking. The house had wind chimes that kept talking to each other in the small breeze. A woman opened the door with a baby on her hip, small hand fisted in her shirt. Behind her, a boy ran in socks across the hallway and tripped and laughed. She was younger than me, maybe 30. She wore a loose gray dress and her hair in a high knot, and she looked tired in the soft way that new mothers look. She glanced at the street like she expected someone. Then a familiar shape appeared behind her. His shoulders. His left hand with the silver ring. He kissed the baby's hair and said something I could not hear. She leaned into him and smiled. He took the baby. The wind chimes clicked once, like a clock marking an hour I had not known existed. I did not knock. I stood there with my heart beating in the wrong part of my throat and counted the bricks in their porch. 21 across. 6 high. I memorized the cracks as if memorizing would protect me from the meaning. Then I walked back to the car with my fists pressed into my pockets so hard my nails left half moons in my palms. On the drive home, the radio was talking about traffic on I-10, and I laughed once, a sound that did not belong to me. At a stoplight, I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of the dash and did not recognize my mouth. It was said in a line that said, "We are not going to survive this old version of ourselves." When I pulled into the garage, the same lights hummed and the same smell of gasoline wrapped around me. But the room felt like a new place, like I had moved without boxes. That night, he came in at 11:12 and said sorry in the tone of someone who has already forgiven himself. He took off his shoes and rubbed his eyes and told me a story about a client whose signature pens kept running dry. I listened like a professional, noting the details, marking the hesitations. When he paused, I asked if he ever went to Spring Branch for work. He blinked once in that way he has before he lies, as if rebooting. Then he said sometimes. I asked for the company name. He said a contractor whose name he could not remember. I looked at his hands and saw flour on one knuckle. He said he had grabbed a pastry from the gas station. The gas station near us does not sell pastries, only wrapped honey buns. I nodded and poured him water and thought of the wind chimes and the baby's small fist and the boy in socks. I lay awake until 3:17 a.m., watching the fan cut the same circle, the same deceitful calm. I realized then that my life had turned into a set staged by someone else, and I was placing props back where he preferred them. In the morning, I would choose whether to end the play or step through the fourth wall and address the audience that had gathered without my consent. I closed my eyes and saw the GPS route drawing itself in a tidy blue line over my city. 2 homes stitched by a secret thread. The blue line pulsed once like a vein. I knew I would follow it to the truth, even if the truth split me open. The next morning, I woke up with the taste of dust in my throat, as if the air itself had thickened overnight. He was already gone, his side of the bed cold, the sheets folded back with the neatness of someone who had left deliberately early. I went downstairs and found the coffee pot half full, steam rising faintly. The mug he liked rinsed and turned upside down on the drying rack. That small detail told me he had time to care for appearances, time to keep the rhythm of our house intact, even while splitting himself between 2 lives. I stood in the kitchen with the hum of the refrigerator and the smell of burnt toast, and I thought about the other kitchen in Spring Branch, with the wind chimes and the woman in the gray dress, and wondered if their mornings smelled like baby powder and scrambled eggs, if his mug sat rinsed on another counter, as if 2 plays were being performed on 2 stages at the same time with the same actor. I dressed slowly, choosing jeans that no longer fit the way they did in 2018, and a navy blouse I had bought on sale for $17 last year. The one he once said made me look calm. At the clinic, I typed names, insurance numbers, and complaints of back pain or migraines or infections, my hands moving faster than my mind, until suddenly I was staring at a file that read chest tightness duration 3 weeks. I realized I had been breathing shallowly all day, like my lungs were also holding a secret. Around noon, I excused myself and sat in the staff bathroom, listening to the fluorescent buzz and the echo of someone washing their hands outside. I stared at my reflection in the small mirror, noticing the deepening lines near my mouth, the tiredness under my eyes, and I thought about how betrayal is not a thunderclap, but a steady drip that hollows you from the inside. By the time I drove home, the sun was low and orange, flattening the houses into silhouettes. Sophia sat at the table coloring, her pencil strokes quick and messy, filling the page with purple. She looked up and asked why Daddy wasn't home yet, and I told her he had an important meeting. The lie slid out too easily, as if I had been practicing it in silence for weeks. She nodded, uninterested, and went back to her drawing. I watched her shoulders curve and felt a sharp ache in my chest. Because children believe what you tell them until one day they don't, and that day divides your life into before and after. I stirred the rice with butter and garlic again, forcing myself to swallow, forcing myself to play the part of a woman whose life was not splitting at the seams. That night, he came in at 10:30 with a plastic bag from a gas station, holding 2 sodas and a pack of gum, props to match his story. He kissed the top of my head, and I smelled not gum but faint lavender shampoo, the kind sold in baby aisles. I wanted to confront him right there, slam the GPS history in his face, demand names, demand explanations. But my voice froze in my throat like a locked door. Instead, I asked if he was tired, and he smiled, sat down, and told me a story about a contractor who was always late. I watched his lips move, and all I could think was that the man across from me had mastered the art of lying in such small doses that it looked like truth. I swallowed my water and nodded, playing my role, while inside something ancient and violent was beginning to wake. The following day, I printed the bank statement at work. My hands trembled as I scrolled line after line. A charge at a supermarket near Spring Branch. A pharmacy purchase on a Saturday I remembered being home alone. Small amounts, $20 here, $40 there, almost invisible unless you traced them together like footprints. I traced them, circling with a red pen, and when I was finished, the page looked like a battlefield of tiny wounds. He was feeding another household with the same money I had earned counting hours and skipping lunches. I folded the statement into my purse, my heart beat loud in my ears, and when I looked up, a patient was standing in front of me holding a form, waiting. I smiled at him, my lips trembling, and said, "How can I help you today?" As if my life were not dissolving into thin strands. At night, lying beside him, I studied the slope of his back, the familiar mole near his shoulder blade, and I realized that the most dangerous kind of betrayal is the one that wears the face you kiss every day. I wanted to shake him awake and scream until he admitted everything, but I also feared the silence that would follow once the words were out. I turned to the ceiling, watched the fan blades move in circles, and thought about time, how 15 years can feel like a solid house until you discover the foundation was never cement but sand. I closed my eyes, whispering to myself that truth is heavier than love, but it is the only thing that keeps you standing. The morning after the bank statement, I felt as though every object in the house had been rearranged slightly, tilted in a way only I could see. The toaster hummed differently. The floor creaked in a new key. Even the photos on the wall seemed to mock me with smiles frozen from years I could no longer trust. I drove Sophia to school, her backpack bouncing as she skipped toward the entrance, and I sat in the car longer than I should have, watching other parents hug their children, wave at each other, talk casually about lunches and projects, as if their worlds were intact. My phone buzzed with his message. "Working late again. Don't wait." The words hit me like cold water because now every letter carried double meaning. Working late meant nothing more than being somewhere else, building another life while I was left here, preserving the skeleton of the one he had abandoned. By noon, I couldn't resist anymore. I drove to Spring Branch, parking a block away, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I walked slowly, pretending to scroll my phone, until I reached the house again. This time I saw him outside, in jeans and a plain t-shirt, carrying groceries from the white SUV. The woman I'd seen before was beside him, holding the baby, her face soft with exhaustion, but glowing in a way I hadn't seen in myself in years. They moved around each other with ease, like people who shared routines, jokes, mornings. The boy I had seen earlier ran to him shouting, "Daddy!" and I froze so hard my legs felt nailed to the sidewalk. Daddy. That word cracked open a silence inside me I didn't know was there. I clutched my phone tighter, nails digging into my palm, and whispered to myself that I was not imagining any of this. It was real, and it was worse than any suspicion could ever prepare me for. I left before anyone could see me, stumbling back to the car with my breath shallow, the world blurry through tears I refused to let fall. I sat gripping the steering wheel until my hands ached, replaying the scene in loops, every detail sharper than the last. The groceries, 2 bags, one heavy enough to pull his arm down, the way she adjusted the baby against her shoulder as if they'd done it 1,000 times. The boy's laughter, bright and unbroken. It all painted a life built carefully, brick by brick, while I had been tricked into thinking we were the only house standing. The steering wheel burned under my grip and I screamed once, a sound muffled by the closed windows but loud enough to make my throat sting. Then I drove home, numb, the city rolling past like a movie I wasn't part of. That night, when he came home just after 11, he smelled faintly of baby lotion and laundry detergent that wasn't ours. I sat at the table with the bank statement folded in front of me, my fingers drumming against it. He kissed my cheek, distracted, and asked if there was food left. I looked at him, really looked, and saw how much effort it took for him to keep his lies aligned. I wanted to throw the paper at him, scream about Spring Branch, about the boy calling him daddy, about the double life he thought he had hidden. But instead, I asked calmly how work had gone. He hesitated for only half a second before launching into a story about a client dispute, and I nodded, marking each false word like tally marks in my head. My silence was not forgiveness, it was strategy. I knew now that the truth would not come by asking. It would come by forcing the mask to fall, by catching him in a moment where even his rehearsed lines couldn't save him. Later, lying beside him, I studied the way he turned his back to me, his breathing steady, his body relaxed as if he were safe. And I thought about the years I had given him, the sacrifices that stacked like bricks in the walls of our marriage, the dreams delayed, the money saved and spent carefully, the trust handed over again and again. I thought about the manipulation, the subtle way he'd shaped my decisions until they no longer felt like mine, the way he had convinced me that stability required silence. And now, here I was, staring at the man who had built another life in plain sight, daring me to either collapse under it or burn it all down. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself that I would not collapse. The truth had already started carving its way through me, and I was ready to let it burn. 2 days later, the universe handed me the crack I had been waiting for. He left his work phone charging in the kitchen, its black screen pulsing with a single notification before dimming again. My heart lurched, my palms slick, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I waited until the shower started upstairs, the water rushing steady, and then I slid the phone into my hands. No password. My chest tightened at the arrogance of it. He really believed I would never look. The screen opened onto a thread of messages, all from a contact saved only as M. The last one read, "Can you bring the diapers tomorrow? Don't forget the wipes too. Love you." I scrolled higher, past emojis and late-night plans, past photos of the baby I had already seen in her arms, past words like our and family, each one a blade slicing deeper. My breath shook, but I forced myself to keep reading, to gather evidence like armor, because I knew the moment of confrontation was coming. When he came downstairs, towel slung around his neck, humming as though the world owed him nothing but comfort, I was sitting at the table with the phone in front of me. He froze for a fraction of a second before his face rearranged itself into calm, but I had already seen it. The flicker of fear, the recognition that his stage lights were collapsing. I asked quietly, "Who is M?" The silence stretched. He reached for the phone, but I pulled it closer to me. His jaw tightened, his lips parting as though excuses lined up on his tongue, waiting their turn. For a moment, we were two actors facing each other with scripts in hand, and I realized I no longer wanted to play my part. I wanted the unscripted version, the one he had hidden even from himself. He muttered something about a colleague, but his eyes darted once, and I knew the mask was cracking. That night, we did not sleep. I stayed awake watching shadows crawl across the ceiling while he shifted beside me, restless, his body betraying the calm tone he had tried to keep. By morning, I felt something strange. Not devastation, not yet rage, but clarity. 15 years of my life had been bent around this man's promises. shaped by sacrifices he had demanded under the banner of love. Now, the illusion was breaking, and I could finally see the structure underneath. It was not a marriage. It was scaffolding, built to hold up his other life, his other choices. The years I thought were ours had been financing both sides of his double stage. My hands shook as I brewed coffee, but my resolve felt steady. He had given me the truth without meaning to, and once you see truth, you cannot unsee it. Later that day, as I drove past Spring Branch again, I slowed near the house, the white SUV parked in the driveway, the tricycle still on the porch. My chest tightened, but I did not cry this time. I stared at that house and thought of every bill I had paid, every hour I had worked, every moment I had given him permission to convince me to wait, to sacrifice, to be patient. My patience had been the currency for his lies. My silence had been the soil where his betrayal grew. And now, standing on this edge, I realized I had a choice: to keep living inside his script or to rip the pages apart and write my own. The thought terrified me. It also made me breathe deeper than I had in months. The confrontation came on a Sunday, the kind of quiet afternoon when the whole neighborhood seemed to nap. I had folded the laundry, lined up Sophia's notebooks for school, and waited for him to return from another so-called errand. When the garage door rumbled and his footsteps crossed the kitchen, I was already at the table with the bank statements, the GPS printouts, and the phone screenshots spread out like evidence in a trial. He froze in the doorway, his keys dangling from his hand, and I saw the exact moment he realized the performance was over. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might crack my ribs, but my voice came out steady. I asked him where he had been. He opened his mouth, shut it, then tried a half-smile that used to disarm me years ago. Not this time. I slid the papers toward him and whispered, "I know everything." The silence that followed felt endless. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Sophia's crayons rolled across the living room floor where she had been drawing. He looked down at the pages, his face shifting from shock to irritation, as if my discovery was an inconvenience rather than a betrayal. "You went through my things," he muttered, as though that was the crime. My laugh came out sharp, foreign, a sound that startled even me. I told him I had gone through the wreckage of my life and found a second family hiding in it. His eyes flickered, guilt, anger, calculation. He started talking fast, words tripping over each other. How it wasn't what I thought, how he was helping a friend, how he stayed late to protect us. Lies stacked on lies until they collapsed under their own weight. I cut through them with a single sentence. "A boy called you Daddy." For the first time, his mask cracked wide open. He stammered, reached for explanations that no longer worked, tried to summon the man he had pretended to be. But I sat unmoving, my fingers pressed into the wood of the table, grounding myself in the solid feel of reality. He begged me not to tell anyone, not to ruin what we had built. The irony nearly choked me. Ruin what we had built, as if his double life hadn't already done that. He offered promises, swore he would end it, swore he loved me, swore we could repair. Each word felt smaller, hollower, until they sounded like echoes in a house already emptied. My chest ached, but my mind was clear. I had been manipulated for years, made to believe sacrifice was love, that patience was strength, when in truth it was the leash that kept me silent. That night I did not sleep beside him. I took Sophia into my arms and lay with her in her bed, her small breath steady against my chest. I stared at the ceiling covered in glow-in-the-dark stars we had stuck there when she was 4, and I thought about what legacy I wanted to leave her. Not one of silence, not one of living in someone else's shadow. I thought of my mother's sacrifices, how she used to whisper that endurance was the only way to survive. But endurance had broken me, had turned me into an accomplice in my own erasure. Now I wanted something different. I wanted truth, even if it tore the walls down, especially if it tore the walls down. When dawn broke, pale light touching the stars above us, I knew the next step would be mine, and it would not be quiet. The next step was the hardest because it meant pulling the truth out of shadows and placing it into the light where it could no longer be denied. I waited until Monday evening, when he came home late again, tie loosened, eyes scanning me with the cautious glance of a man who knows his excuses are thin. I told him we needed to talk, really talk, and his shoulders stiffened instantly. Sophia was upstairs finishing her homework, so I closed the kitchen door and placed the manila envelope on the table. Inside were the documents I had gathered, the GPS logs, the bank charges, the screenshots from his second phone. I slid the envelope across the table without a word. He didn't open it, didn't need to, because he already knew what it contained. Instead, he rubbed his temples as though I were the problem, as though I were dragging him into some unnecessary storm. I asked him one question: how long? His eyes flickered, his mouth opened and closed, and then he muttered, "Since 2021. My chest hollowed out, air rushing from me in a soundless gasp. 3 years of my life, 3 years of sacrifices, birthdays, bills, holidays, all lived inside a lie. He tried to explain, saying it had started as a mistake, a night he couldn't take back, and then somehow it had turned into something bigger, something he hadn't planned. I watched him talk, his hands moving, his voice softening as if charm could rewind time. But the words only scraped deeper. He admitted the boy was his. He admitted he had promised her a future. My world tilted again, but this time it did not collapse. I had expected this, even if I had prayed I was wrong. I asked him what he wanted now, and his silence told me everything. He wanted both. He wanted me to hold his secrets, raise our daughter, keep our house intact while he played father in 2 homes. I felt my pulse hammer in my ears, a roar louder than his excuses. I stood, palms pressed to the table, and told him clearly, "You cannot have both. You chose. You chose every night you drove to Spring Branch, every time you lied to my face. You already chose." His mouth trembled, his eyes wet not with remorse but with fear of losing control. For once, the power shifted. I was not pleading, not shrinking. I was standing in the ruins of what he built, and I was refusing to keep carrying the weight of his lies. He tried again, softer this time, begging me to think of Sophia, to keep the family together for her sake. The manipulation stung, sharp and familiar, the same tool he had used for years. But I looked at him and realized the most dangerous thing I could do for my daughter was to let her grow up believing silence equals strength, that betrayal can be endured quietly. I wanted her to see a woman who stood up even when her heart was breaking, who refused to be written out of her own story. My voice shook as I told him I was done, but the words felt solid, like iron forged in fire. That night, I packed a small bag, only what I needed for a few days, and took Sophia to my sister's apartment on the east side. She asked questions I wasn't ready to answer, and I told her simply that Daddy had made choices that hurt us, but that we were safe and together. She leaned her head against my arm and whispered, "I just want you to be happy, Mommy." Her words cut me deeper than anything he had confessed, but they also lit a fire in me. For the first time in years, I felt the faint outline of freedom pressing against my skin, terrifying and raw, but undeniably real. The first night at my sister's apartment, I barely slept. The couch was lumpy, the air conditioner rattled like loose bones in the wall, and Sophia kept rolling against me in her sleep, seeking comfort. Still, I lay there wide awake, staring at the faint city light leaking through the blinds, my mind replaying every detail of the life I thought I had. The wedding in 2010, where he whispered promises over a cheap silver ring. The years of saving for a down payment, cutting corners so carefully we could list every expense down to the last dollar. The Christmas when I skipped buying myself a coat so he could have the leather wallet he'd admired in a shop window. Each memory now felt poisoned, rewritten by the confession that all along he had been planting pieces of another future somewhere else. My chest ached with a grief so heavy it felt like drowning. But beneath it, something harder began to grow. Resolve. By morning, my sister brewed coffee strong enough to scrape my throat raw. She hugged me without words, then shoved a notebook into my hands and told me to start writing everything down. Dates, lies, receipts, times I had been alone. "Make it real," she said, "because otherwise he'll twist it until you doubt yourself." I nodded, and for hours I sat at her small kitchen table listing every sacrifice, every manipulation, every late-night excuse. The notebook filled quickly, each page darker than the last, until I realized I wasn't just documenting betrayal, I was reclaiming the truth piece by piece. Sophia sat at the other end of the table drawing with crayons, her purple houses and yellow suns spreading across the paper, while I charted the collapse of the world she thought was solid. That evening he called. 6 missed calls, then a voicemail, his voice frantic, promising he could explain, begging me to come home. He said Sophia needed her father, that families survived worse, that we could still fix it if I just forgave him. I listened with the phone pressed against my palm, feeling the words slide over me like oil, slick and impossible to hold. My heart twisted, but my mind was clear. Forgiveness without truth is just another cage. I deleted the message without replying. 2 days later, he showed up at my sister's door. His face looked smaller, his shoulders slumped, as though the weight of exposure had begun to crush him. He asked to talk, to see Sophia. I let him in because I wanted him to see with his own eyes what his choices had built. He knelt by her, stroked her hair, and for a moment I saw the man I had once loved. Then she looked up at him and asked, innocent and direct, "Daddy, why don't you live with us anymore?" His face broke, his mouth opening without sound, and he looked at me with a desperation that nearly made me falter. But I held my ground. I told him the truth was no longer negotiable, that he could not live 2 lives and expect us to bear the cost. His eyes filled, his hands trembled, but I did not look away. That night, as I tucked Sophia into bed at my sister's, she whispered, "Are we going home soon?" I kissed her forehead and told her home wasn't a place. It was where we were safe, where we were loved without lies. I lay beside her until she fell asleep, then went to the window and looked out at the city lights. For the first time in years, I realized I was not waiting for him anymore. I was waiting for myself, the version of me who had been buried under years of sacrifice and manipulation. She was stirring now, raw and unsteady, but alive. The following week blurred into a rhythm I had never imagined for myself, half survival, half awakening. At the clinic, I forced my hands to move across intake forms, typing insurance numbers with the same precision as before. But my mind drifted constantly to lawyers' offices, rental listings, and the faint terror of standing on my own after 15 years of leaning against the same wall. My sister pressed cash into my hand one evening, 5 crisp 20s she insisted I keep, and I felt my pride sting, remembering the countless times I had denied myself small comforts so he could claim we were saving for our future. Now the future was a room I had been locked out of, and every dollar in my pocket felt like a stolen key I had finally recovered. He called less often, but when he did, the tone shifted, from begging to blaming. One night, his message snapped through the phone. "You're tearing this family apart, not me. You're making Sophia suffer because you can't move past a mistake." I played it twice, listening to the venom slip through the cracks of his voice. A mistake, he called it. 3 years of lies, a child, a second household, all reduced to a single careless word. My hand trembled, but my anger burned hotter than fear. For the first time, I saw clearly that he wasn't sorry for what he had done. He was sorry for being caught. Sophia began asking harder questions. At bedtime, she wanted to know why Daddy didn't tuck her in anymore, why he was always working. I swallowed the lump in my throat and chose honesty wrapped in softness. I told her Daddy had made choices that hurt Mommy, that sometimes adults forget how to love the right way, but that none of it was her fault. She studied my face with eyes too old for her 9 years and whispered, "I don't want to forget how to love the right way." My heart cracked, and I hugged her so tightly she squirmed, but inside, I promised her she would never again live inside a lie I protected for someone else's convenience. One night, unable to sleep, I spread the notebook across the table and added a new page, not of betrayals, but of dreams. I wrote down things I hadn't dared think about in years, finishing the nursing degree I had abandoned when Sophia was born, saving for a small place of our own, taking Sophia to visit my mother in Salvador without having to ask anyone's permission. The words came shaky at first, but soon they filled the page like water flooding a dry riverbed. I realized that I had been living as though my choices belonged to him, and now, for the first time, I could see the outline of a life that was mine alone. 2 days later, he appeared outside the clinic, leaning against his car like a man rehearsing regret. He tried again, flowers in his hand, apologies spilling from his mouth, promises layered on promises. He said the other life was over, that he had chosen me, that we could start fresh. For a moment, my heart twisted with the familiar ache of wanting to believe. But then I remembered the boy's voice calling him Daddy, the woman's tired smile, the diapers in the message thread. Lies don't end because someone declares them finished. They rot slowly, poisoning everything they touch. I shook my head, my voice trembling but firm, and told him I wasn't coming back. His face hardened instantly, the mask slipping again, and I saw the truth in his eyes. He didn't want me. He wanted control. And control was the one thing I would never give him again. That night, back at my sister's apartment, I held Sophia close and whispered that sometimes the hardest thing we do is also the bravest. She nodded sleepily, and as her breathing slowed against my chest, I felt the first fragile thread of peace settle inside me. It wasn't freedom yet, not fully, but it was the beginning. And beginnings, I realized, were stronger than endings. The first meeting with the lawyer felt like walking into a room I had avoided all my life. The office smelled faintly of leather and old paper, the blinds half drawn against the afternoon sun. I sat on the edge of the chair, fingers twisting around each other, and handed over the folder I had filled with bank statements, GPS printouts, and copies of messages. The lawyer, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a steady voice, flipped through the pages slowly, nodding without surprise. When she looked up, she didn't offer pity, only clarity. "You have enough here to prove infidelity and financial misconduct," she said flatly. The words made my stomach drop. Proof, misconduct, infidelity. Terms that sounded clinical, but underneath them pulsed the raw wound of my life. I left the office lighter and heavier at the same time, clutching a future that now had the shape of paperwork and hearings and signatures on official seals. That evening, when I told him I had spoken to a lawyer, his face drained of color. He tried to laugh it off, called me dramatic, said divorce was for people who didn't really love each other. But the cracks in his voice betrayed him. He switched tactics, pleading, reminding me of the early years, of our wedding, of the night Sophia was born. His words might once have melted me, but now they felt like lines from a play I had already walked out of. I told him calmly that love without truth was nothing but performance, and I refused to sit in the audience anymore. His eyes hardened, his jaw clenched, and for the first time I saw not the man I had loved, but the man who had built an entire cage of lies and expected me to decorate it. Sophia watched us carefully in those days, her silence heavy with questions she was too young to shape. I made sure she saw laughter still existed, even in the middle of endings. We baked cookies in my sister's cramped kitchen, powdered sugar dusting her hair until she looked like a small angel. We walked to the park, and I pushed her on the swings, her giggles piercing through the fog that still wrapped around me. Each of her smiles reminded me why I couldn't go back, why I had to fight not just for myself, but for the kind of love and truth she deserved to grow up around. Late one night, I sat by the window with the city buzzing faintly outside and opened the notebook again. On one page, I wrote the years I had lost, 2010, 2013, 2016, 2021, each marked by a sacrifice that had been twisted into fuel for his double life. On the opposite page, I wrote the years I intended to reclaim, 2025, 2026, 2027, each marked not by sacrifice, but by choice. My choice. The ink bled slightly on the paper, and I pressed harder, as though carving the future into stone. For the first time, the word freedom didn't feel like a dream whispered in secret. It felt like a plan, solid and alive. 2 days later, he tried one last gesture. He left a bouquet of lilies on my sister's doorstep, with a note scribbled in his rushed handwriting. "I'll fix this. Don't throw away what we built." I stared at the flowers, their scent heavy and sweet, and realized how much I had once longed for such gestures, how I would have clung to them like proof of love. Now they looked like camouflage, a final attempt to hide the decay underneath. I picked up the bouquet, walked to the dumpster at the end of the street and dropped it inside. As the petals brushed against black plastic bags, I felt something uncoil in my chest. Not victory, not yet, but release. That night, as Sophia slept curled against me, I whispered to myself that the hardest part wasn't leaving him. It was leaving the version of myself that had believed enduring his lies was strength. That woman had lived in me for too long. Now, piece by piece, I was learning to bury her, so that someone braver could finally stand in her place. The court dates came faster than I expected, and yet every day leading up to them felt like wading through wet cement. I sat in waiting rooms with walls painted beige, clutching my file of evidence while his lawyer tried to twist years of betrayal into misunderstandings, mistakes, or financial stress. He avoided my eyes most of the time, but when he did look at me, I saw the man I once believed in flicker behind his gaze. A ghost haunting a body I no longer recognized. The judge listened carefully, asked questions in a tone stripped of emotion, and every answer I gave felt like peeling another layer of skin off an old wound. By the time I left the courthouse, I wasn't sure if I was exhausted or free, or if both feelings could exist together in the same body. At my sister's apartment, Sophia asked if Daddy was mad at me. Her voice was soft, eyes wide, as though she was bracing for an explosion that never came. I knelt to her level and told her the truth again, in words a child could carry without breaking. Daddy made choices that hurt our family, but love doesn't disappear because of anger. She thought about it for a long moment, then asked if we would be okay. I hugged her so tightly she squeaked and told her we already were. That night, when she fell asleep, I sat alone with the quiet realization that healing was not a destination waiting for me somewhere far away. It was already happening, in the small decisions I made each day to choose honesty over silence. Weeks passed, and slowly, routines formed. I started cooking again, not out of obligation, but because I wanted Sophia to taste comfort at the end of long days. We ate spaghetti with too much garlic, pancakes for dinner when we felt silly, and sometimes just sandwiches on the couch while watching cartoons. Laughter returned, shy at first, then stronger, as though it had been waiting just outside the door for me to open it. The nightmares still came, dreams of GPS routes and hidden phones. But in the mornings, I felt them fade faster, replaced by a fragile calm that grew sturdier with each sunrise. He tried to slip back into our lives here and there, showing up with gifts for Sophia, or calls filled with half-promises. But something in me had changed permanently. The woman who once believed his explanations was gone, and in her place stood someone who could see manipulation for what it was. When he accused me of poisoning Sophia against him, I met his words with silence instead of shame. When he tried to guilt me about finances, I reminded him calmly that choices have prices. His frustration grew, but it no longer crushed me. It bounced off the walls I had finally built for myself. One afternoon, while cleaning, I found the old shoebox with our passports, health cards, and the budget spreadsheets we used to keep. I sat on the floor, flipping through the papers, and realized they no longer tied me to him. They tied me to myself. Each line of savings, each expense tracked, each careful choice I had made over the years was proof not of our partnership, but of my resilience. I had carried the weight all along, even when I thought I was leaning on him. Tears stung my eyes, but this time they weren't bitter. They were a kind of release, a mourning and a celebration all at once. That night, as Sophia slept under the glow-in-the-dark stars, I stood at the window and whispered to the city outside, "I survived you." I wasn't speaking to him anymore. I was speaking to the version of myself that had been silenced, manipulated, bent into shapes I never wanted to hold. She was gone now, and in her place was someone raw, scarred, but unbroken. The kind of woman who could look at betrayal in the face and still choose to keep moving. By the time the divorce papers were signed, the world outside looked the same, but everything inside me had shifted. The courthouse hallway smelled faintly of floor polish and old coffee, and when the clerk stamped the final page, the sound echoed like the closing of a vault. He didn't look at me as he left, just shoved his hands into his pockets and walked quickly down the steps, shoulders hunched. For years I had imagined that moment as fire and thunder, a dramatic finale to match the pain he had caused. Instead, it was quiet, almost anticlimactic. And maybe that was the point. His power over me ended not with an explosion, but with silence. I walked out alone, the papers folded neatly in my bag, my hands trembling with both fear and relief. At my sister's apartment that evening, Sophia greeted me with her usual smile, asking if the judge was nice. I laughed softly, brushing her hair back, and told her the truth. The judge was fair, and now we could move forward. She didn't understand the weight of those words, not fully, but she sensed the change in me. Later, when she fell asleep with her favorite stuffed bear tucked under her chin, I sat by the window and let the tears fall freely. Not tears for him, or even for the years I had lost, but for the strange, sharp freedom that now coursed through me. I had no script to follow anymore, no role to play but my own. The weeks after felt like learning to walk again. I searched for apartments, scrolled through listings late at night, circling prices and neighborhoods that might fit. I met with landlords who eyed me skeptically, as though a single mother carried risk. Each meeting tested my resolve, but each one also reminded me that I was building something from the ground up, something that belonged entirely to me and Sophia. At the clinic, I began taking extra shifts again, not out of desperation this time, but out of determination to stack bricks for our new life. The exhaustion was heavy, but it was mine, earned honestly, and it no longer felt like sacrifice. It felt like investment. Every so often he tried to pierce the wall I had built, a message saying he missed me, a voicemail about how Sophia deserved both parents under one roof. Once, even a long letter slipped under my sister's door, filled with apologies that read more like rehearsed lines than truth. I didn't reply. The silence between us had become my shield, and I held it firmly. I had given him 15 years of answers, of patience, of second chances. Now I was done. The quiet was not empty. It was clean. One Saturday, as I was folding laundry, Sophia came up to me with a drawing. 2 houses, side by side, with a bright sun overhead and a small girl standing between them. "This is me," she said proudly. "And these are our homes." My throat tightened, but I nodded, smiling through the ache. She wasn't broken. She was adapting. And if she could carry both truths in her small hands, then so could I. That night, as she slept, I whispered to myself that survival was no longer the goal. Living was. And for the first time in years, I felt ready to step into that promise. The new apartment was nothing like the house we had left behind. The walls were plain white, the carpet thin, and the kitchen barely big enough for 2 people to stand in. But when I turned the key in the lock for the first time and pushed the door open, Sophia ran inside squealing, her footsteps echoing against the bare walls. And I realized that home was not about square footage or furniture. It was about safety, about freedom, about the absence of lies. We spread blankets on the floor that first night, ate pizza from the box, and laughed until my sides ached. It wasn't luxury, but it was ours. And for the first time in years, I slept without waking to the sound of a phantom garage door opening. In the months that followed, the rhythm of our lives rebuilt itself in small, steady ways. I learned how to balance bills on my own, how to stretch $20 across 3 days when needed, and how to take pride in every check that came with my name alone at the bottom. I signed up for evening classes at the community college, chasing the nursing degree I had abandoned years ago. Sitting in a classroom again, notebook open, pen moving across clean pages, I felt the pulse of possibility in my chest. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was shaping a future with my own hands. Sophia adjusted with a resilience that humbled me. She decorated her room with drawings taped to the walls, stars and suns and smiling stick figures holding hands. Sometimes she cried at night, asking why Daddy couldn't stay with us, and I held her close, whispering truths that were both gentle and firm. Love should never hurt. Lies can never last, and she deserved a world built on honesty. She would nod, her small face pressed against my shoulder, and eventually her breathing would soften into sleep. Each night, as I lay beside her, I promised myself that the cycle of silence and sacrifice ended with me. She would grow up knowing that strength was not endurance, but choice. He faded from our lives slowly, like a shadow retreating at dawn. There were still court-ordered visits, still moments when his presence stirred old wounds, but the power he once held over me was gone. I no longer measured my worth against his approval, no longer bent myself to fit the shape of his demands. When he looked at me now, I could see the shock in his eyes, as though he was facing someone unrecognizable. And maybe he was. The woman he had manipulated into patience and silence was gone, replaced by someone who had walked through fire and refused to come out carrying anyone else's ashes. One evening, after a long shift at the clinic and a rushed dinner of pasta and garlic bread, I sat on the balcony of our apartment with a glass of water in my hand. The city buzzed faintly below, lights flickering like constellations scattered across the earth. I thought of everything: the years lost, the lies uncovered, the pain endured, and I let it wash over me without drowning this time. I whispered to myself that endings are not failures. Sometimes they are the only way beginnings can breathe. And in that quiet moment, I knew I had not just survived his betrayal. I had reclaimed myself from it. For years, he had told me that sacrifice was love, that patience was strength, that silence was stability. Now I knew better. Love is not built on lies. Strength is not built on erasure. And silence is nothing but a cage when it protects the wrong person. I stood, stretched my tired body, and went inside where Sophia was drawing another picture, this time of just the two of us, holding hands under a wide yellow sun. She looked up, smiled, and said, "See, Mommy? It's us. Just us." And in that moment, I realized I wasn't afraid of the future anymore. I was already living it.